I was just curious about the logic behind a report and giving New York Times readers the idea that these girls were the most at risk. And she was very nice. She told me that the reason she did it is that the AAUW, the American Association of University Women, had published a study called Latinas at School, and she implied that later there could be an article about boys. Maybe someone would publish a study, Latinos in school. Actually, people have published studies because Hispanic boys are at severe risk academically and in many other ways, but there has not been a front-page New York Times story. Now, I think that this is emblematic of how boys are treated everywhere. As a group, they are at greater academic risk, but they get little or no attention. And as I said before, some people think, well, what do we care? They'll find their way somehow. I'm telling you, they won't. They won't. If a boy drops out of school, it's a calamity. And they don't know it. People don't explain it. Now, the Australians, the Canadians, the British, they're well aware of this. They're 20 years ahead of us in trying to find out how to engage boys academically, because they know that it's a crisis personally for the young man and for the society. Because if you ignore boys, you're also ignoring your economic future. And there are several studies have come out recently. People are beginning to pay attention to the economics of male underachievement. And it's horrific for the young man and what his prospects will be. And it's not just dropping out. If you just don't go to college, or you don't have to go to college, but you have to at least go to get training, some kind of professional training beyond college. Girls are doing it. And they're outdoing boys with associate's degrees, master's degrees. It's 57% women. And even PhDs now, it's still only 50 or 51 or 52%, but women are getting more PhDs. Now, as I said, this is more than an American problem, and other countries are very worried about it and doing what they can, and they are active. But they don't have an AAUW. They don't have a National Women's Law Center. They don't have all these litigators that just freak out if you suggest that boys might be at risk. The AAUW has published these elaborate studies saying it's not really true, the boys are doing fine, and it's spin, spin, spin. And they just have this preternatural ability to manipulate data and gain publicity. And so Americans are, well, eventually, it took a long time. As I said, when I wrote the book, a few of us were trying to tell people about this problem. It took a while to break through, but now more people than ever know about boys, and Newsweek's had covers, and 60 Minutes did a wonderful story about it, lots of books and so forth. So I would think now, it's not what I faced when I wrote the book, that nobody believed it. Now people believe it. The question is, what do you do about it? How do you help the boys? There seem to be three ideas that the Canadians, Australians, and the British are experimenting with. One is where you combine education with vocational training. And I'll give you an example of a school that I visited in about a year ago called Aviation High in Queens, New York. And this is a huge high school, 2,000 kids. And I walked in, and it was in this gritty, like, strange place in Queens, way out in nowhere. But I went into this building, and I walked into maybe the most inspiring place in all of New York City, even though it was in this kind of industrial neighborhood, this gritty building. But you go in, and first of all, it's very quiet. And the first thing I thought was, are the kids here today? Or, did I come the wrong day? I couldn't hear. Usually you go into a high school, and it's noisy. This was quiet. And I met the principal, and they took me around. Aviation High School, as the name implies, the kids can learn aeronautics, and they build their own from scratch. I mean, they learn how to build airplanes, understand every part of it. A lot of them do become airplane mechanics. They get good jobs. Some become pilots, engineers. They become all kinds of things. but they draw from an at-risk population of African American and Hispanic kids in poor sections of New York. But they have one of the highest graduation rates, highest college matriculation rates. I asked the principal, I said, well, maybe you just take the really smart kids. And he said he doesn't do that. He says he doesn't get that, you know, he doesn't have that, he doesn't have a lot to choose from, and a lot of the kids are struggling that apply. He says he goes by their attendance record. He says, you give me a kid with a good attendance record, and I can give you a pilot or an engineer. They get into this school. They're so intrigued by what they're doing. They're tinkering, and they're building. And FedEx donated not a 747, a 727, some kind of Cessna 727 out in the, it's in the playground. And if they sit in their English class, they have to do academics. We don't have these vocational schools anymore where you just take kids that don't look very promising and you dump them in these schools. No, they have to be academic, and they should be able to go to college if they want to. And so these kids have to suffer through courses on Shakespeare and American history, standard courses, because they can't, otherwise they can't go out and tinker with the airplane, which they really want to do. And I interviewed all these boys and girls. And just one other story, there's a professor at McGill University, Sumitra, I can't quite pronounce her name, Sajakopolan. She's a professor of biomechanics at McGill, and they have a huge problem with male dropout in Canada. And she organized a program. She saw the boys were just so bored in school and in the community, so she organized a hands-on program where she supervises them and gave them tools, and they ended up building a solar-driven Stirling engine from Coca-Cola cans and straws or something. They didn't have a lot of equipment. She was shocked to find all these boys who had never held a hammer or a screwdriver before. They'd never had tools, and they loved them. And they became engaged, and a great success story from this professor. I saw the same thing at Aviation High School. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is that everybody's saying this is part of the solution. And if you talk to employers, people say, well, we've shipped all the jobs and there are no jobs. There are jobs, but there aren't skilled Americans to fill them. And they're good jobs. But one of the reasons they will go over, I mean, of course they save money, but they are also, there's a dearth of skills. And so this is it seems like everyone wins all around, is that the boys and girls that want to go to these schools can get, it's not just boys. However, there's a problem, which I will tell you about in a moment. Kids go there and they get this training and they stay in school, and it just seems so obvious. And it's not just Aviation High. Massachusetts has what someone called the Cadillac of vocational high schools. The same thing. They're getting kids in there that read at a 4th grade level, but then they find out they're not going to be able to if they want to study. Well, it's a technical high school, so they can study computers, or they can study refrigeration or welding and all sorts of things that they can't do it unless they do their academics. So anyway, the National Women's Law Center is working with the Department of Education to sue these schools because Aviation High, for example, is 80% males. More guys than girls go there. Now, I talk to the girls love it, but they know they're different. It's not the typical 13-year-old girl that dreams of being an airplane mechanic, but a lot of guys do it. But there are some girls, and the girls are leaders, and they love it. And there was one Indian girl I met who said she loved it, and her parents let her go there because they thought it was so safe. So there she is in New York City in an urban school surrounded by 2,500 guys, Adelaide, and it's the safest place in New York City. It is. Anyway, it's a great success story. It's all over, but what's happening now, we're not supporting it. The Department of Education is investigating these schools because they consider it discrimination, because you've got so many guys going. If you go to a typical vocational school, there are girls and boys there, but they do offer things like early childhood education and medical training to go into medical fields, cosmetology. The young women go into those fields, and the boys do the welding and refrigeration and air conditioning and automotive. And you get some crossover. And I talked to Allison Fraser, who's the director at this one of these technical high schools in Massachusetts, and she told me, we beg the girls to go into the other fields. We bring in women welders who are glamorous, earning a lot of money. We do everything we can to get them. And she says that you can't get them to do it. But she says there's tremendous pressure from the federal government. They're right now moving to use Title IX. They want to do for vocational training what they did for sports. I tell you this because this is just the wrong way to go. This is being driven by feminist litigators at the National Women's Law Center from this lobby that we needed, but now we can't get rid of it. And it's exactly the opposite of what we should be doing. A second solution is all male classes. Just separate kids. And it's legal, you can do it in public schools. It was part of No Child Left Behind. There could be innovations with all male and all female classes. So you take a group of low-performing boys, and you get a teacher who really likes boys, because not all teachers do, and boys know it. And that's a huge problem for disaffection and just, that doesn't go well, the relation between. But you get a teacher that really likes boys, she or he, can be they're brilliant, women that are brilliant at teaching boys. And you use male-friendly pedagogy. And so there's fewer books about sharing feelings and sitting in circles, but more kind of reading. Apparently there are differences in what girls like to read and boys. This has been studied very, very carefully. And girls do gravitate to fiction, little girls and adolescent girls, and boys more adventure and history and books about stuff, about things. And, so a good teacher would just make sure that you had those. Also competition, turning everything into a competition. And lots of recess. And let them go out and rough and tumble and come back in. Now, I will tell you, in our schools, we are moving away from recess. Some schools are eliminating it. If we had organizations that looked after the interest of boys and did a disparate impact study, they can tell you that banning recess is not good for girls. It is terrible for boys. And yet, that's the direction we're going. We're moving away from recess. Now, the ACLU has launched a huge lawsuit. They're going after these schools because they call it gender discrimination. Because they start out with the idea that it's completely, what they say is it's like, would we allow classes with just blacks and whites and separating kids by race? And they think that it's analogous to gender. And they've got 8 professors that organized, and they have an organization, and they're pushing it. Now it's a mess. And we're not going to be able to do it. The English are doing it, the Australians are doing it, they're perfecting it, they're coming up with boy-friendly, a whole new subfield in education, how to educate a disengaged boy. It's a talent, it's an art form, one that is not practiced in the United States because of this very determined lobby. What does the lobby suggest? Well, I've been studying it for years, and I'm going to finish in 1 second because I want to talk to you. I've been I'm putting out a new edition of The War Against Boys, so I've updated everything. And the war, I wrote that, it came out in 2000. Well, the war has intensified because the women's groups, and especially gender scholars in women's studies departments, that's different from the political women's groups, but just part of the kind of the feminist establishment, they say, no, the problem is boys have to change. And it's their masculinity. And at Wellesley College and the Harvard Graduate School of Education and Tufts University, the gender scholars, to the extent that they study boys, they look for ways to rescue them from what they call the mask of masculinity. And what does that come down to? Things like the NEA, the National Education Association, suggested that teachers replace tug of war with tug of peace. Or that children play tag where no one is ever out. It's called Circle of Friends. And everyone wins, everyone gets a trophy. All of that, the self-esteem education, caring, nurturing, lots of friendship circles. And it turns out what the British have found is that if you organize a class with circles, people sitting in circles and sharing, and boys go to sleep, the girls do the work.